Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. Well, Vancouver's leafy, affluent Shaughnessy neighborhood will stay pretty much the same. Vancouver City Council has turned down the idea of looking into densifying and adding more affordable housing. Does a housing crisis mean affluent neighborhoods need to change? What are the roadblocks and what would it mean for residents? Plus, some of your thoughts on recruiting foreign nurses to fill the nursing shortage and a story about reconciliation in the Great Bear Rainforest. I'm Michelle Eliot. Welcome to BC Today. Thank you for joining us on CBC Radio 1 and live streaming as well on CBC Gem, cbc.ca/BC, and on the CBC Vancouver YouTube page. Well, a motion to densify one of Vancouver's most affluent neighborhoods failed at City Council last night. The motion was brought forward by Councillor Christine Boyle, and it would have directed staff to create policies for more affordable housing, shops, and services to the area. Proponents of the motion, called Unlocking Shaughnessy, argued it would alleviate a lack of affordable housing in the city and take pressure off other areas to fill the gap. But the Majority Caucus on Council said the motion was divisive and would have been a waste of city resources. That's the ABC majority. And here's some of Vancouver City Council's discussion of the motion at last night's meeting.
Councillor Montague, please go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just some comments. I don't think the argument the argument that's laid out in the motion, I think, is nonsensical. I don't think it's practical. I don't think we're going to provide any actual density. There's not going to be any measurable supply gained here. I think it's just a distraction for staff that are actually working on viable housing solutions. And I actually think that as I read through this, and I read through it a number of times, I think the motion is actually divisive, and I won't be supporting.
I'm not feeling comfortable to endorse something with so many uncertainties. And also, I heard from different academia saying that the product will not be economically viable in Shaughnessy. Councillor Fry, please go ahead.
We're nibbling around the edges, suggesting that folks who rent in the city should have to live on the arterials, when in fact we have a beautiful tree-lined neighborhood, which I had the privilege of, I was staying at my mom's down the hill a couple of years ago, and I would walk my dog up the hill towards Shaughnessy, and it was great. It was completely empty. The parks were empty, it went off leash, and there was not a lot of activity. So there's clearly the capacity for more people there, and it's a beautiful neighborhood. So I think that this is a sensible enough motion, accepting some of the whereas clauses that might seem more inflammatory, accepting some of the online commentary that might seem more divisive. This is actually a pretty sensible approach to a real, conversation that we need to have around densifying the city, and the reality that there is a dearth of infrastructure for this neighborhood.
Councillor Carbion, please go ahead.
From a purely pragmatic perspective, if we want to get to 3331, and if we want to get the housing built, and the significant amount of housing that's in the pipeline that has impact citywide, don't support this motion, because all we're doing is setting staff up to come back and say, hey, this is going to slow this down, or we can't work on that. And I actually just want to get some stuff built and delivered. I don't want to be the council of planning and aspiration. I want to be the council of delivery.
I have heard everyone at this table speak to the need for housing, and I am incredibly disappointed that we will continue to leave one neighborhood off limits and cram and focus that housing in the places where we have continued to push it for years on arterials and existing busy neighborhoods.
So this motion failed with Councillor Zhou, Councillor Carbion, Councillor Dominado, Councillor Bly, Councillor Montague, Councillor Claassen, and Mayor Sim in opposition.
Those were some of the arguments for and against Councillor Christine Boyle's motion to increase housing density in the Shaughnessy neighborhood in Vancouver. That motion failed by a vote of 7-3. Now, this morning, Councillor Boyle reacted to that vote on CBC's The Early Edition with Stephen Quinn.
It's a beautiful neighborhood, huge old trees and so central in Vancouver, and more people should be able to live there. In my lifetime, the population of Shaughnessy has decreased significantly while the rest of the city is growing. That puts added pressure on every other neighborhood. And I welcome more neighbors in every neighborhood. I recognize that we need more housing everywhere. It's not fair when one neighborhood, a central neighborhood in the city, isn't doing its part in welcoming more residents in the midst of a housing crisis.
So the motion wasn't to change density immediately in Shaughnessy. It was to explore the potential of increasing density there. Why did you position the motion that way?
Look, this Mayor Sim and ABC have not been super receptive to ideas that I've brought forward in the last year, and I really was presenting this in a way I thought they could support. We have heard from them time and time again that they want more housing, and so I wanted to bring forward an idea I recognized was a change, but in a way that I actually thought all of this council could get behind, because we have recognized the scale of the housing crisis and the need for more housing. So the request in the motion was to have staff report back with recommendations for what it looks like to add hopefully a significant amount more housing in Shaughnessy, but to do so in a way that was adding rental housing, that was balancing, protecting some of the beautiful old heritage buildings with the need for infill or rental or more. So really trying to be practical and reach across the aisle and presenting something that I had honestly hoped that Mayor Sim and ABC could overcome the politics of and support on its merit.
That's Vancouver City Councillor Christine Boyle on the early edition with Stephen Quinn this morning. And her motion seeking to find ways to densify Vancouver's Shaughnessy neighborhood was rejected at council last night. Boyle and the two Green members were outvoted by ABC councillors and Mayor Ken Sim. Well, we just heard from one city councillor, Christine Boyle. We're going to hear now from ABC Councillor Rebecca Bly. Good afternoon, Councillor Bly.
Hi, Michelle.
Thank you very much for joining us. ABC councillors voted against this motion. Why?
Well, I think that there are, a number of course, individual comments from ABC councillors was shared on some of that pre-tape. So, of course, I won't speak for them. They've spoken for themselves. But I think generally speaking, when we look at the demands that we have in terms of adding housing density across the city with the limited resources that we have within our existing staff complement, both planning and permitting, the realities are we have to focus on sort of the greatest return on investment of staff time to make sure that we're able to actually make a significant dent in this housing crisis by bringing the most amount of new units to market as soon as possible. And this motion, even in some of the descriptions in the pre-tape by Councillor Boyle, clearly outlined why that would not happen had we let this motion go forward.
Why wouldn't it? What makes this different from East Vancouver or the West End?
Well, I think there's a few different things happening right now, but the sort of most significant changes are the recent announcements from the province to require additional housing units on lots that are zoned currently as single detached uses. And the additional work and analysis that is required in conjunction with that work. And then the layered complexity of Shaughnessy, because the restrictive zoning in Shaughnessy is not to exclude so much as to much of the zoning restrictions, particularly around First Shaughnessy, are to preserve heritage. Now, do we need to preserve heritage over creating new housing units in a housing crisis? Maybe, maybe not. But that work is already underway. So to say that it's not happening because this motion didn't pass is just simply untrue. This work is going to happen based on the provincial legislation that has been tabled and that is in active discussion with our staff at the moment. Right. So what it would essentially do is it sort of pushes this much more complicated area, which is not, when you look at sort of Vancouver proper, the Shaughnessy area is, sure, it's an opportunity, but we have close to 56,000 units of new housing actively in large-scale developments within 5 kilometers of this area. So there is an enormous amount of work that our staff have been tasked to do, adding the complexity of incredibly aged infrastructure related to sewers, and the requirement, storm infrastructure, the capacity that is required in order to add density is just simply not there.
Aren't you going to have to do that when the provincial rules do kick in? As you say, this is going to happen. That's going to apply to single-family lots, allowing
Sure.
multi-units.
Yeah.
So why not simply take steps towards it now?
Well, I would say that it's already happening, Michelle. That's sort of the complication of reading and sort of responding to motions that are sort of brought out of nowhere, to be quite honest, considering the fact that we are in active discussion with the province, with the housing minister, with the premier. We have moved probably half a dozen at least new motions related to increasing housing in village nodes. Passed a motion yesterday increasing housing around schools, which are much needed density. It's rather than targeting, which I think is some of the comments that you played earlier around the divisive nature. Rather than targeting a particular community, we need to be working together to recognize we are a whole city, a tapestry of very different and unique neighborhoods, and that put together make Vancouver the city that we love. So to sort of target one area and pull it apart, recognizing that the result is not going to be in more significant housing units in a housing crisis, you got to wonder, where is this coming from?
How do you know it's not going to result in more significant housing in a housing crisis?
Well, we do have to work through each motion that any member brings forward, of course, and we understand from our staff that that the work that's contemplated in this motion is not currently in our strategic priorities or in our work plans for the coming years. There were comments that it would take, in conjunction with the proposed amendments from the province, that this work would unlikely be completed before 2026 to even look at the possibility of significant changes to zoning. Like, we have to remember that we are rezoning properties within Shaughnessy on one-off basis, and they have passed, and they're under construction. There's one up 32nd and Granville Street. There's another closer maybe to 18th and Granville. This is in Shaughnessy. These are rezonings. They're multi-unit rental developments that are currently underway.
Okay,
by the
but the
council in
population
last year.
density continues to be the same, and the population continues to be in decline.
Well, the population density of this particular area, I mean, it's an interesting fact that has been pulled out. The population density has been in decline and was commented on over the last 50 years in this area by 20%. But of course, average household members or number of average household members in across Vancouver has also been in decline by 40%. So I don't want to twist numbers around, but I think at the end of the day, we have to recognize that we have to all be working together to be increasing our housing density, and to suggest that that's not happening because it's not specifically being targeted in Shaughnessy at the moment is just not true.
I guess that's where I'm a bit confused, because when you talk about working together, you say that this is coming through the province anyway. Why not put all that work, align your work already with what is coming from the province anyway? When you see that, I'm sure you can see that this looks like it's a rejection of a proposal to densify in a wealthy neighborhood. Why not just do the work, start the work now if you think it's coming anyway?
Well, we've just undergone a 4-year process in terms of creating a Vancouver plan, and the Vancouver plan will ultimately result in an ODP, an official development plan for the city, which we've not had since more than 60 or 70 years. And that's required in order to be sort of the vehicle to enable the provincial legislation. So we have these plans and structures in place. I'm curious why the Councillor Boyle did not bring this particular concept or motion forward when that broad planning exercise was underway. Because to suggest that just because it was put in front of us, we should accept it, we have to take a pragmatic approach on these things. Sure, we can pick a side about who's rejecting what or at what point the divisiveness started, but the reality is this has come forward. We're looking at ourselves saying, okay, we have limited time, we have limited staff resources, we have an incredible amount of demand. Construction costs are going up, cost of borrowing is going up, which is actually prohibiting new development across the entire city. Where do we want to have our staff spend their time in order to be able to move the dial on our overall housing needs?
Okay.
And sometimes we have to make difficult decisions, but the reality is this would have diverted our staff time to focus on something that really just isn't going to deliver the units. And we heard that directly from staff.
Do you anticipate opposition from residents in Shaughnessy once provincial rules allowing multi-unit development on single-family lots come in?
Well, I think that's a very good question, and I think that's a question and a conversation that we need to be alive to, because that is a consideration. And I think the reality is that our growing population across the province does require everybody that lives in BC to sort of look in their communities, in their neighborhoods, across their cities and say, we need to make room, right, for more people, for more neighbors. And how are we going to do that in a strategic way that ensures that we're not just keeping rental to arterials, which can be the criticism. We approved new zoning changes across our city that have rentals spread out across all neighborhoods, not on arterials. So I do think that there's an opportunity here to fold this work into the provincial legislation.
And ultimately, do you think a neighborhood like Shaughnessy, again, with the size of housing that is there, the size of the population, do you think it should be considered for change, despite last night's vote?
Right. I mean, I think that there is an opportunity. I mean, I think one thing to note is that there were changes to the zoning bylaw to allow multi-family dwellings a few years back. So we need to look at what kind of uptick did that create? What are some of the barriers? I think heritage is important to a lot of people in the city, to show sort of like the growth over time and the change in architecture and what the evolution of a city and all the people that live within it are an important part of what makes a city beautiful and what makes a city great, not just sameness everywhere. So there's a lot to balance because this is one of the oldest communities in our neighborhood. But I would say we have to also look strategically at what we can allow. Where's the infrastructure? What do we need to improve in terms of infrastructure? And we also need to get the province on side, which I believe they're working on, to support cities big and small to be able to deliver this housing.
Okay. Councillor Blythe, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Michelle. Have a great day.
You too. That's ABC Councillor Rebecca Blythe. We are asking you then, in light of a housing crisis, do affluent neighbourhoods like Shaughnessy, other neighbourhoods in the province, do they need to change? Do they need a rethink? And what are the barriers to that, do you think? And what are the impacts on that neighborhood, on those residents? You can call us 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733, pound 690 on your cell phone. If you live in Shaughnessy, you can call us too. That's 1-800-825-5950. Well, this week, Minister Ravi Kahlon announced a series of bills to increase housing supply that targets single-family housing and, yes, sets minimum requirements for densities for municipalities. And the BC government is moving full steam ahead in its drive to combat affordable housing. Municipalities, though, will be central to that shift. So you can give us a call then, again, on our open line, 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. Do neighborhoods that are considered Tony or affluent around the province need a rethink? Joining us to discuss this now are Tom Armstrong, CEO of the Co-op Housing Federation of BC, and Jens von Bergman, a data scientist with Mountain Math and co-author of the Canadian Mortgage Housing Corporation's Metro Vancouver Zoning Project. Good afternoon. Thanks for joining us.
Pleasure.
Good afternoon.
Tom Armstrong, I'll start with you. As I understand it, your Co-op Federation Association supported this bill to densify in Shaughnessy?
We certainly did, along with our colleagues at the BC Nonprofit Housing Association.
Okay, and why do you support it?
Well, I think to state the obvious, we have a housing crisis on our hands, and I think every order of government needs to behave in the solutions they advance as if they're responding to a crisis. And it's, if you want to take an all-hands-on-deck approach to introducing new housing where it's most desperately needed, no neighborhood can be off limits. And we took this motion to be an important signal that the city and its partners are serious about making a dent in what's admittedly an affordable housing crisis.
What's your reaction then to Councillor Bly's explanation there for rejecting the motion?
Well, I understand that there are political sensitivities at stake, and it's a question of balancing priorities. But, honestly, I think we need bold moves. We need to be pushing the envelope. We need to be making each other significantly uncomfortable in the way we approach the housing crisis that we find ourselves in. And I think this was an opportunity to push the envelope, and it's a missed opportunity.
Jens von Bergman, what about you? What are your thoughts on the council's decision last night?
Yeah, my thoughts are quite similar to Tom Armstrong's. I think we want to build housing in areas where people want to live, that is close to amenities, close to jobs. Shaughnessy is a very central neighborhood in our city. It has good connections to transit, and it's been off the table for a very, very long time. So we have some small concessions. There are tied to heritage preservation. We can do a little bit of infill. There's a lot of process involved. There's little uptake, and it does not result in significantly more housing. And so we've seen this. We've seen population declining, children declining over time. It's a neighborhood that needs help. And council had a chance to act on it and really help revitalize Shaughnessy and bring it up to just allow people to live there, invite shops and services into the neighborhood too. And it's very sad to see that this opportunity was not taken up.
Let's take a call now. Tim is joining us from Kamloops. What are your thoughts about the vote last night regarding Shaughnessy? And do we need to rethink affluent neighborhoods around BC, Tim?
Yeah, hi, Michelle. I wasn't really surprised, and I was saying to your screener, it kind of reminds me of the incident a few years ago involving, I believe, an NPA councillor at the time, Hector Bremner. A couple months after he got elected, he then suggested that Kerrisdale and Shaughnessy, and correct me if I'm wrong, but what I understood is he believed that should be multi-zoned or changed for zoning, to which the NPA at the time seemed to have a massive heart attack and kick him out because of that suggestion. But it just seems to me that cities, whether this will happen to Kamloops, you never know. But places like Vancouver or Toronto or Montreal, where you have an established wealthy area, I think are always going to be brought up, because if housing is always going to be an issue, and remember, we did kind of murder the National Housing Program years ago, which I think
the federal government program
trying to get back.
The federal government program.
That's right, the National Housing Program that basically was eliminated by successive conservative and liberal governments in the late 80s, early 90s. But anyways, I just think this is an issue that's going to be ongoing. It's never going to stop. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks so much for your call, Tim. And in 2017, Councillor Hector Bremner called for a blanket rezoning of a corner of West Point Grey and sort of the Pacific Spirit Regional Park and Spanish Banks area to make 6-story buildings. So that was what was brought up at that time. Let's go to Jens von Bergman on that. Previous attempts, perhaps elsewhere, to do this kind of thing and upzone in certain neighborhoods. Are there examples from other municipalities, perhaps?
Yeah, so this example of Hector Bremner was I think good and in line in Vancouver as an attempt to do something similar, to get exclusive neighborhoods, just bring them back into the more general area of Vancouver. But there are lots of parts where municipalities across the province have been struggling with how to add more housing, how to add it in different ways. And I always like to point to Colona as a very successful example of this, where they went in and allowed 4plexes in 2016 on a fairly central portion of town that people really wanted to live in. And it really worked. The results were great. Within the first 5 years, they had about 100 single-family homes out of the 800 that were rezoned, turnover into fourplexes. Lots of family moved in. It was something, not every home that sold turned into a fourplex. About half of them did.
Okay.
It was very successful. It was partially supported by having pre-approved designs, which really helped to give certainty to builders, but also to the neighborhoods, that they knew what things would look like when the neighborhood would change. Which incidentally is something that the province today announced that they want to do too, these pre-approved designs.
Okay, and I'll get back to you on that and ask you about what about infrastructure to support that increase in population. We'll get back to that conversation as we discuss Vancouver City Council's vote last night, rejecting a motion to explore the idea of expanding and densifying in the Shaughnessy neighborhood in Vancouver. You heard ABC Councillor Rebecca Bly there saying it's resources for the amount of work compared to the return on investment and what that would mean in terms of results. It didn't seem it would be worthwhile at this point, but also that the province is bringing in those kinds of changes, and so it didn't. They didn't want to presuppose or preempt that work. Is a little bit of my interpretation of what I heard from Councillor Bly there, but asking you, do we need to rethink these kinds of Tony neighborhoods amid a housing crisis? That was the argument from Councillor Boyle, Christine Boyle, behind her motion. So what do you think? Is that something we need to do to change? What impact would it have on that neighborhood? And what impact would it have on the residents? Love to hear from you. 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. You can hit pound 690 on your cell phone. My guest, Tom Armstrong of the Co-op Housing Federation of BC, Jens von Bergman, a data scientist with Mountain Math and co-author of the Metro Vancouver Zoning Project. More of your calls coming up after this CBC News update.
Good afternoon. Police in Surrey are investigating two separate collisions involving pedestrians, including a fatal hit and run. The RCMP say an 81-year-old man was hit and killed last night in the Strawberry Hill neighborhood. The second crash happened at about 8:15 this morning when a youth was hit and seriously injured while walking near the Willowbrook Shopping Centre. The provincial government is shutting down the youth custody facility in Prince George. By the end of March, all youth custody services will be centralized in Burnaby. The province says the Prince George Centre costs about $5 million a year, and some of the savings will be reallocated to high-priority youth justice programs. And parched conditions in northeastern BC show no sign of easing as the province releases its latest drought map. The map shows level 5 drought remains in place for the Dawson Creek area north to the boundaries with the Yukon and Northwest Territories. And now taking a look at the forecast on the North Coast, lots of rain today with strong winds and a high of 10. Windy and cloudy in the Peace with highs up to 4 degrees. In the central interior, flurries and showers with a high of 2. Highs to 2 with sunshine in the Kootenays. In the southern interior, sunny with a high of 2 as well. And for Metro Vancouver, Greater Victoria and the Fraser Valley, mainly sunny this afternoon with highs around 8 degrees. I'll have more local news at the top of the hour. Now back to Michelle with BC Today.
Thank you very much, Rob. And welcome back. That's Rob Zimmerman in the CBC Vancouver newsroom. This is BC Today here on CBC. We're broadcasting on radio, 88.1 in Metro Vancouver, online as well, live streaming on YouTube at CBC Vancouver, on our website, cbc.ca/BC, or you can use the CBC Gem live stream service. Well, we are continuing our discussion of housing and density. Vancouver City Council rejected a motion to explore densifying the affluent neighborhood of Shaughnessy last night. And we're asking you, amid a housing crisis, do we need to rethink affluent neighborhoods? Do they need to change? What are the roadblocks and what are the impacts on that neighborhood and those residents? You can give us a call, 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. You can hit pound 690 on your cell phone as well. My guests are Tom Armstrong, CEO of the Co-op Housing Federation of BC, and Jens von Bergman, a data scientist with Mountain Math and co-author of the Metro Vancouver Zoning Project. Jens, I'll go back to you. You brought up the Colona example where they were able to upzone into fourplexes from single-family homes, something that we've heard from certain municipalities in light of the province bringing in rules to address housing, to build more housing. That we don't have the infrastructure. We're going to need, funding for things like sewer and transportation. Did that work in Colona?
Yeah, so there are several aspects to this. So densification, when we add fourplexes, does not necessarily require big investments in infrastructure. When we have part of the infrastructure that is needed is just to service those units, and we have existing electricity, utilities, and there usually the bottlenecks are things like sewer capacity or stormwater runoff, and those can be managed quite well nowadays at the source and don't really require infrastructure upgrades. At some point, if we add population, no matter where we add it, we might need sewer treatment plants upgrades. These are big ticket items. But that is really independent of how we do it, if we do fourplexes throughout or if we concentrate things. And in Colona, these things is just part of regular growth patterns. It just allows people to live in areas where they want to live by allowing this kind of densification. So the infrastructure impacts there are really quite small.
Okay, let's go to our caller now. Carol, joining us from Strathcona. Hello.
Hello. I wanted to speak to the council people who were supporting this motion in City Hall because, to my mind, it just smelled of the rich get richer and the poor get poorer, and they were couching this through all their statements. I live in Strathcona neighborhood, and I live on the edge of the downtown east side, too. And Strathcona is an earlier and more heritage neighborhood than Shaughnessy is. And it was, about 30, 40 years ago, it was completely renovated. It had the federal, provincial, and civic councils on their side here. And people got their homes rebuilt, and they were permitted to have rentals in the back. Shaughnessy did this, too, when it first came in. There was coach houses in the backyards, and I think there still is. And Shaughnessy people could make a little extra income if they could have a second coach house in their backyard, and it wouldn't sort of impact too much of what Shaughnessy is from the front area if we gave the Shaughnessy people a little chance to make a little more money. I'm quite shocked by what the council did, and I have to phone to speak to this.
Okay, well, I appreciate you phoning us this afternoon, Carol. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
That's Carol in Strathcona. Dave is on the line from Vancouver as well. Hi, Dave.
Hi there.
Yeah, what do you think of the vote, and what do you think of our approach to affluent neighborhoods? Does it need to change?
I think with all the equality that's causing a lot of the problems we have in the world, but specifically anywhere, I think it's time that we start opening up our hearts to creating diversified neighborhoods. There's no reason why Shaughnessy or British properties or anywhere else like that shouldn't allow this type of thing to happen. It's time for us to get into the new age, and that's opening up for everybody.
Dave, thank you very much for your call as well. That's Dave joining us from Vancouver. You have a good day. Let's go back to Tom Armstrong with the Co-op Housing Federation. You know, we heard Carol as well in Strathcona say this is about the rich. Is there a class issue here? Does this discussion and debate get to the heart of class division in BC?
Well, I think the more relevant division here is between owners and renters, and perhaps the systemic bias against renter households that many of our land use and zoning policies have reinforced over the years. For me, it's really not so much about affluence or heritage. It's about how to create sustainable neighborhoods. And why would you not want to bring more density to a neighborhood that's essentially emptying out? You look at the...
So why is that then? What's the resistance?
Well, I think, again, it goes back to a systemic bias against renter households who now make up more than 50% of the households in the city of Vancouver. You hear that in public hearings. You hear it in written submissions to council when rezoning applications go forward. And people will sometimes be as explicit as to say, we don't want renters moving into our neighborhood. And it's time for our political leaders to say, density is a good thing. It creates sustainable neighborhoods. It's not about affluence. It's about sustainable economics. So it's really, sometimes it's important to send a signal. And the signal that could have been sent here is that there's no part of our city where we're not going to welcome newcomers, where we're not going to welcome renters, where we're not going to promote sustainable, diverse, mixed income communities. And that, again, was an opportunity that was lost.
Okay. And Jens von Bergman, people may use the word NIMBY in terms of what's behind, NIMBYism in terms of what's behind being resistant to change. But, what considerations should be given to residents of Shaughnessy? If you do live in Shaughnessy, do give us a call. I'd love to hear from you. But, do we have to consider just how hard it is to face change? When you've lived in a place, you move to a neighborhood for various reasons, you like it there, and you like it as it is. Do we have to give consideration to that?
I think it's important to understand that change is hard and that people have reactions to it. I mean, if next to me somebody would build a really tall building, and I would look at it and I would saying, oh, I probably wouldn't like it. There's going to be construction noise. Maybe I'm going to lose some views. But at the other side of it, I'd have to step back and saying, well, it's not just about me. I live in a city. The city is growing. I profit from all this activity around me. And I need to give other people the opportunity too. And I can't keep excluding what happens near me because of how it might impact my very personal aesthetic or other preferences. I think there's a weighing that has to happen between sort of necessities of living in a place, having safe and affordable housing, and sort of some secondary questions about shadows in my backyard.
Let's get some final thoughts from you both on this then. So as we heard, provincial roads are coming as well. Where do you see this going next? What do you see as the future of Shaughnessy, Tom?
Well, I think we're going to see turbulence around this issue for some time to come. Someone at the last UBCM Housing Summit said there are two things people hate: change and the way things are. And whenever you're trying to address a problem that everyone agrees is acute and needs our most focused attention, you're going to generate some reaction. So I imagine the provincial government is going to keep pushing the envelope on housing. I hope the federal government will do the same, and I think it's up to municipal leaders to recognize that that's the path forward to creating viable, sustainable communities. And whether it's Shaughnessy or anywhere else in the city of Vancouver, where land use has been a controversial issue from day one, change is coming, and it's better to get behind it and make it work for you.
Jens von Bergman, you've looked at zoning in Metro Vancouver. Where do you see zoning going then for these kinds of neighborhoods?
I mean, the province is intervening right now, and the way I view this is as the province is really just curbing some of the most excessive exclusionary practices that cities have been doing, and the most wasteful practices. So that is single-family only zoning, which in many cases really just excludes a lot of people from neighborhoods, from whole swaths of land, and makes it very hard to grow and add housing as the region grows. And then, of course, the refusal to take advantage of opportunities like rapid transit, and this province is stepping in there. But what I would really like to see is, I view this as the province really trying to help the municipalities do what they should be doing. And the municipalities should really take leadership here and go above and beyond what the province is putting in as a minimum, just to help and really use that as an opportunity to shape their cities and get them ready for the next 50 to 100 years. And I really hope that this kind of leadership from cities will emerge from this. we've seen that the provincial zoning is really something that is not that ambitious. It's if we look at the transit-oriented zoning that they've put in, it is often cities have higher densities for these areas in place already. But there are also areas where the city really just have single-family zoning around rapid transit stations, which doesn't make any sense at all. And so I'm just hoping that the cities really step up here.
Very good to speak with you both. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Pleasure to be on.
You take care. Tom Armstrong is CEO of the Co-op Housing Federation of BC, and Jens von Bergman is a data scientist with Mountain Math, co-author of the CMHC's Metro Vancouver Zoning Project. It is now 12:46, 1:46 in the Mountain Time Zone. You're with BC Today here on CBC. I'm Michelle Eliot. Thanks so much for joining us. Well, 1 out of every 3 food bank users in BC is a child. Add this to the fact that food banks in the province are seeing a 21% rise in clients over this past year. And the increase in clients in rural communities, well, that's 32% year over year. Coming up, Friday, December the 1st, is the 37th annual CBC British Columbia Food Bank Day broadcast. And as you know, over the years, we have raised over $18 million for food banks in the province. I'll tell you how you can make a donation in a few minutes. But here's one of the families you might be helping.
Hello, my name is Hans. I'm from South America. What brings me to the food bank is to support my family in my monthly budget in terms of groceries and food to make ends meet. We have a baby that was born here, so I've been living in Vancouver around 3 years. So he's 2.5. I came to study here as an immigrant and also a way to get better opportunities here in Canada. But also we have a baby, so though that increased the different expenses that we have in our monthly budget. So I was talking with some friends and they told me about the food bank and say, okay, I want to try. That's why I started coming since last year. And hopefully in the future I will be a volunteer or a donator. Because right now we live only with one salary, which is my salary. But living in a city as Vancouver is difficult to live with just one salary. So at this time, my wife is studying. So next year she's going to finish, and we are going to have 2 salaries. So maybe my situation is going to change. That will be what I will be willing to donate my time and also probably some money in the future. So.
Thank you very much to Hans for sharing his family's story. Well, Friday, December the 1st, is the 37th annual CBC British Columbia Food Bank Day fundraiser. If you're inspired and able to make a donation, you could do so at your convenience at our secure online donation site. That's cbc.ca/foodbankday. There's a drop-down menu there. You can direct your donation to the food bank of your choice in the province. And within 24 hours of donating, you will receive by email a tax receipt. And again, that website is cbc.ca/foodbankday. And that Friday, December the 1st, I will be sharing the stage with none other than Margaret Gallagher, the host of North by Northwest, for a special 3-hour edition of BC Today. We sure look forward to that program. It's going to be a lot of fun, a lot of great voices for you to listen to and to watch. And each year you can listen to the program. CBC Radio is where you get us, of course, but you can now also watch the live stream on CBC Gem or cbc.ca/BC. More details to come over the next 2 weeks. It's 12:49 now, 1:49 in the Mountain Time Zone. Well, to a 2-year anniversary now. And we'll get you a story about the flooding anniversary here in BC, because 2 years ago this week, catastrophic flooding hit our province, tearing up homes, livelihoods, and roads. And cities that bore the brunt of the damage say they're now more prepared to cope with another disaster, but the threat of a river in the U.S. looms large. Well, CBC's Michelle Eliot reports now on the challenge of mitigating floodwaters that flow across an international border.
2 years ago, the Fraser Valley was devastated by what was called a once-in-a-century flood. Homes and highways were destroyed and thousands forced to flee.
The water was rising and rising because of the breach and rising, and then I was told to evacuate.
Since then, 17 kilometers of dikes in Abbotsford have been raised by half a meter and major breaches have been fixed. But the fear of another flood lingers.
They should be doing a little bit more with and quickly. Like, we can't go through something like that again. They have to do something with the American River.
The American River he's talking about is the Nooksack in Washington state. When it overflows, its floodwaters pour into the Sumas River, then cross the border into Abbotsford. Most of the time, the Barrowtown pump station keeps that water at bay. But 2 years ago, there was disaster here.
We're in a much better spot than we were in 2021. And we are hopeful that that's not going to happen.
The mayor of Abbotsford says the city has undertaken a major effort to fortify what it can on this side of the border. But an existential challenge is how to manage the water that is not in Canada's jurisdiction. Last month, officials on the Canadian and American sides signed a transboundary agreement to address Nooksack flooding, but it came with no monetary commitments or timeline, only a promise.
I'm comfortable that right now that we will come to arrangement that will work for both countries. But I can tell you that our folks who are negotiating things now will be making sure that they have the Canadian interests in mind.
Across the border in Sumas, the hardest hit American community, the mayor says he wasn't included and that not enough is being done.
It was a little embarrassing, actually. You know, the leadership doesn't know that that's going on. If it were up to me, I'd be down there with a shovel right now, right?
In the 1990s, a cross-border task force was formed to research solutions after the Nooksack River overflowed its banks. In the end, no actions were taken. There is hope this time will be different. Michelle Gassoub, CBC News, Vancouver.
The CBC's Michelle Gassoub there reporting on the 2-year anniversary of the flooding and atmospheric river in BC. 12:52 now, 1:52 in the Mountain Time Zone. Well, the Vancouver International Mountain Film Festival is now on, and one film takes us to the heart of the Great Bear Rainforest along BC's north and central coast. In 2016, the province, First Nations, and environmental groups, as well as the forest industry, came to an agreement on how that unique and stunning swath of forest would be managed and protected. And the Kitisou Hay-Hays Nation are at the center of this land stewardship. They're the subject of a documentary called Keepers of the Land. And Chief Douglas Nislos joins me now. He's elected Chief Counselor of the Kitisou Hay-Hays and co-director and producer of the Keepers of the Land film. He joins me now. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Thank you so much for joining us. I know you have been traveling quite a bit, so it's good to have you with us. Can you tell us about the inspiration for this film?
Yeah, it's a film that we have been dreaming about for the last few years. It's a film that we really wanted to highlight a lot of our work at the community level. I come from a very small community in the central coast of BC called Clemtu, and we do a ton of stewardship work, and so that's really what the film's about.
And your stewardship work really has been central to the protection of this rainforest. Can you explain to us and remind us why it is so special and unique?
It's a very unique place. It's the only place that, it's right in the heart of the Great Bear Rainforest. It's home to the Kitisou Hay-Hays people. It's one of the only places on the planet that you'll get a spirit bear. And we have done a lot of work in terms of protection. So protection on the land side, and we're working right now some more protection on the marine side.
Yes, we're showing some scenes on our live stream right now from your film's trailer. It's breathtaking, really, to say the least. And Chief Nislos, tell me about your own story. I understand you had an encounter with a spirit bear or Kermode bear, and that's what led you to your work.
Yeah, I used to be a bear guide. We started up an ecotourism operation with a company called Spirit Bear Lodge, which is a community-owned and operated tourism business. And had several encounters with these bears, got to spend a lot of time with them, and decided to dedicate my life more towards stewardship and helping protect and conserve wildlife and our oceans, and I've been doing that for probably 15 years.
What has that involved?
It's quite broad. I mean, our stewardship work, we do everything from land use planning to marine use planning. We drive a lot of science programs. We develop watchman programs of our own men and women from our community that get out there and monitor and manage. We recently worked with the provincial government to shut down both the grizzly bear hunt and more recently the black bear hunt. We recently got BC Parks Authority now to go and enforce and protect a lot of the protected areas. And then we do a lot of youth work as well to make sure that we're grooming the youth, the next generation of stewards. So.
And what do you hope people, think about or feel when they see this film?
I guess there's a few things. I mean, there was three things we really want to go after. Number one, we wanted a strong message from our elders and our hereditary chiefs, a strong message to our youth, talking about their stewardship responsibilities, and that was really important. I think the second part is we really wanted to highlight the marine world because the marine space is so important. We're an ocean-based people. We depend on the ocean for transportation, for food. It connects all of our communities. And we also wanted to highlight the work that we are doing as First Nations, as a small First Nations community in BC. We've done a ton of work, and we really wanted to highlight that. And that's something we don't really do a good job of promoting ourselves, promoting our work, but this is a good example that we do a lot of work that leads to management changes, policy changes, and hopefully more protection. So,
do you see this as part of reconciliation?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I would say in years past, we haven't had a say in a lot of the policies and the management, things like the Fisheries Act or the Oceans Act or the Wildlife Act. But that's now starting to change. And I think now, whether we're pushing more Western science, but we're also incorporating traditional ecological knowledge and the local knowledge. So I think that's very much ingrained a lot of our work. And we have an opportunity for the first time to have a say in some of these things. And so.
It's a real pleasure to speak with you. And again, the film looks absolutely beautiful, as is that part of our province. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me.
That's Chief Douglas Nislos, an elected chief councillor with the Kitasoo Hay-Hays Nation, and co-director and producer of the film Keepers of the Land. That's screening at the Vancouver International Mountain Film Festival's fall series, on now until November 19th. Online streaming is on until December 10th. That's it for us today here on the program. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon on BC Today. And join us tomorrow. Our pet segment will be back, and we will talk about what it takes to foster a pet in BC. So you'll want to tune in and call in for that open line. I'm Michelle Eliot. Thanks for joining us. Have a great afternoon.